So in the last video, I said I would talk about the timing of end time events, but I realized I need to first talk about the two women that are found in the book of Revelations, because I'll need to reference them in the timeline. So it'd be good if we had a bit of understanding of who they are. So there are two women spoken of and described in Revelations. The first is found in chapters 12, 19 and 21, and the second is found in chapters 17 and 18. The first is described, the woman is described as being clothed with the sun. The second woman is clothed in scarlet. Now both give birth, one to Christ and the other to the Antichrist. Now throughout the Bible, the symbol of a woman or of a wife or a bride or a virgin or a harlot always references God's people. Sometimes God's people are said to be chaste as a virgin because they are staying faithful to Him and worshipping Him alone. Or sometimes they are symbolized as a harlot because they are being unfaithful and worshipping other gods and running after other idols. But the symbol of a woman is always a reference to God's people, not the world, not the secular people, but God's chosen people. So in the book of Revelations, which is a message from Jesus to his bride, showing her, warning her of the things that will take place during that period between when the church age finishes and the millennial age begins. There's this transitional period, and that's what the book of Revelations is all about. So it's that period immediately leading up to and including the tribulation period and the outpouring of God's wrath upon the earth. So these two women or groups of God's people are going to emerge during that period. So here in Revelations, we see a chaste woman and a harlot. Both are a reference to different groups of God's people. It's not hard to understand that one group symbolized by the woman dressed in the sun with the moon under her feet and a garland of 12 stars on her head, which represents the 12 tribes of Israel, she gives birth to the Christ child, and that group are those that are remaining faithful to God during the tribulation timing. Now, the harlot represents those of God's people that are being unfaithful to God. They're whoring after other idols, and it also tells us that they will be in a strong coalition with the Antichrist and they will be worshipping the Antichrist. Now, the prophetic meaning of the woman in chapter 12 is multi-dimensional. Prophecy does not have to have just one meaning. Now, she could represent Eve, out of which all mankind came, and ultimately the Christ, or she could represent Israel, out of which came the Messiah, or she could represent Mary, who gave birth to the Christ, or she could represent the church, who bore the message of Christ. And then during the end of the age, there will be a group of God's people that will have the same heart as Mary did, who will surrender to the Holy Spirit, forming Christ in their lives. So the scarlet harlot speaks blasphemously. This group of God's people will worship the dragon and the beast and give their authority to the beast. In Revelations 18 it says, "The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the child that she brings forth because of this union is the Antichrist." But as it also goes on to tell us, God has already judged the harlot. But before he brings the final judgment, before he unleashes his wrath upon her, he is calling to his faithful people, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive of her plagues. So he is holding back judgment and giving his faithful people time to come out of the apostate church. So these are the two women. They represent two groups of God's people at the end of the church age, which is now. This is the end of the church age. The faithful woman is described in chapter 12. Then her redemption and reward is spoken of in chapters 19 and 21. Also a little bit in chapter 20 as well. The unfaithful harlot is described in chapter 17, and her punishment and destruction is spoken of in chapters 18 and at the very end of 19, where it describes the Battle of Armageddon. Now, if you want a more in-depth study into these two women of Revelations, I'll provide a link to a video that I made a few months ago. So in the next video, I'll be talking about the signs that will help us understand where we are in end time events.